Today's episode of the Gateway Spotlight is sponsored by Teradata. Did you know that over 700 universities and colleges use Teradata's global engagement platform to facilitate cross-cultural experiences for students, faculty, and staff in more than 85 countries worldwide? The company's solutions help institutions grow global engagement experiences for study abroad, study away, and international student and scholar services on a platform built for personalization, automation, and reporting. You can learn more at teradata.com. Let's go to the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gateway Spotlight, an interview series designed to highlight diverse perspectives, next-generation initiatives, emerging trends, and innovative thinkers in the international higher education community. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts. I'm the Director of Partner Marketing at Podium Education, and today I am super excited to have Angie Schaefer on the show. Angie is the Executive Director of the Fund for Education Abroad. Hi, Angie. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Brooke.
So now I get to do the super embarrassing part where I tell everyone all the amazing things about you and things you've done in your career. So you just have to sit there and listen and just bask in all your glory. Yes, exactly. So Angela, or Angie, as she likes to be called, is an international educator, grants professional, and entrepreneur. Angie grew up in Baltimore City and was a first-generation college graduate. At Goucher College, where Angie earned a BA in International Relations, she served as a director of sponsored research and corporate and foundation relations and assistant director of international studies. Gosh, all the titles in there. Between her positions with Goucher, Angie served as senior director of program development at Cultural Vistas, and she started her career in education abroad at the University of Maryland. Go Terps. She holds a Master's of Arts and a degree in International Education Policy, and she also co-led a Fulbright Hays group project abroad for Baltimore area educators to Rwanda and Mauritius, which is so cool. As the founder of A-to-Z Ventures, a cross-cultural training and international education consulting, LLC, Angie supported nonprofits providing a variety of services, including grant writing and revising, strategic planning, development strategy consulting, intercultural and educational training, and program and project management. She served as Vice President of Communications and Outreach for Be More Abroad, and Angie currently lives back in her hometown of Baltimore City with her family. So welcome to the show, Angie.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be
Great.
here.
Well, you have a lot of experience and stories, I'm sure, to share about your life and your work that you've done. But let's start even before that. How did you find yourself in the international education arena? What's your global education story?
So when I was in middle school, we started taking languages, and I actually started with Latin, which is interesting and sometimes useful, but we were sold on the whole it'll get you a good SAT score thing. I took German, I took French. I was told by my French teacher not to take French anymore, to go back to German. So in high school, when I was looking around at different high schools in Baltimore, there was a school that had exchange programs, and I decided I wanted to go to that one, even though it was a bit further away and no one from my neighborhood was really going there. I was really fortunate to go abroad to Germany as a high school student. It was a very good summer for me to get out of my neighborhood and get out of Baltimore, I think, because I think it really did influence me and make me realize how much larger the world was than where I lived. And so with that, I looked at colleges that I knew had international opportunities. I ended up going to Goucher for my undergrad, which eventually, long after I graduated, really came around to emphasize international studies as part of the curriculum, but it had done so for a really long time, even before that. While I was a student there, after 9/11, I ran into my German teacher from high school and was asking how the exchange was going. And she was like, a lot of the organizations that used to work with under 18, they're not doing it anymore. Parents are feeling they're in their feelings about sending their younger students abroad after such sort of worldwide tumultuous time. And so I asked if I could actually organize the exchange as an internship for credit for college. And so that was really, in terms of professional pathways, how I came into this. I had always been interested in it, but I didn't really honestly know it was a field. And after that, I was mentored by some really wonderful folks encouraging me just to get into international education, and that I could have a job in study abroad, which was like crazy to me, right? I just don't think the career pathways were as carved out maybe at the time. So that was how I started. I applied for a job at Maryland, never thought I would get it, told a really embarrassing story in my interview, and somehow landed that gig and moved down to College Park to start.
I think we might be around the same age-ish, because it sounds like I was in college.
22, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. We're both 22 years old, TikTok stars. Yes. Yes. So, but yeah, so I can totally relate to that time period of early 2000s and it being a very sort of dicey time. I do love though that you had the foresight to like think through like an internship in that arena. Like I just was not that smart. I was like, well, I don't know what to do with my life. And so I guess I have to get a master's degree. Never even considered like the companies that I had interacted with or organizations I had interacted with through my study abroad, how they could be potential like places I could work. I never dawned on me. You're just much smarter. And I think too, it's like talking about the career path component is it's not like when we're in high school or even early in college, people are like, well, there's all these career paths. Like you could work in international education. Like it's sort of like only something people talk about once you've participated in the experience, but people can become doctors without going to the emergency room. Like,
Right.
so it's really interesting that, yeah, we still don't really talk about this as a viable career angle. We talk about education, but not specifically this. So anyway, let's talk about the fun for education abroad. So obviously with, going over your history and your bio, what you've accomplished in your career, what, you've worked in the sort of the grants and fundraising world. How did you find your way to FEA specifically? Because it sounds like, I mean, I'm going to project here a little bit, but it sounds like you had this like great international education experience. And then you also started in your past, past lives, past careers, like doing the grant work and the foundation work, fundraising, and it just sort of like collided to this perfect role. Did you always know it's like, oh, FEA is like where I want to be in my career?
Not really. I have always known that I wanted to advocate for students who come from backgrounds like me, advocate for students who come from backgrounds completely different than me, but just advocate for students that want to have an international opportunity because it's so positively impacted my life. And I've also always known that I've wanted to work in international something, right? And so I think philanthropy is a way of advocating, and it was not a career path I had ever known really to connect in this way. What I was sort of fortunate to do, I loved study abroad and I loved working at institutions of higher ed, but I got an opportunity to go to Cultural Vistas, which is not an institution, it's an organization. And I was working in their program development department. And learning the ropes of, when you work in an institution, yes, you're advocating for funding for your office and you're advocating for funding for students, but working at an organization like that and trying to diversify our programming, which was pretty heavily J1 and then very specific programs like CBYX when I entered into Cultural Vistas in about 2012. It required us you want to do these programs? Great, you got to get the money for them. And so it wasn't really something where I was like, yes, I want to be a grant writer, which is funny enough now one of my favorite things I do. And like, I don't think that's a very common thing. Nobody really knows.
No, not at all. Not even a little. No.
I
I mean, I'm
love
sure
it.
there are people out there, but I've had to do it a few times. Writing is okay. Administering grants, so not fun.
That's not my favorite element of grant work, but it is also something that I got a lot more comfortable with doing, again, because I had amazing mentors and guidance while I was at Cultural Vistas. And for me, even after Cultural Vistas, I was doing a lot more like DOS funding, learning the ropes of writing grants. learning what you learn when you don't get grants, which was huge, right? Like I got a lot better because I failed a ton. We were putting in our name for lots of big things. We got a few of them. We didn't get others, but we got amazing feedback from some of the funding entities, and really taking that into account and figuring out, okay, how much of this is writing, how much is planning, how much is figuring out the legwork if we actually get this. I think all of that made me just realize again, so going like what we were saying, these career paths that are there are so many other ways to do internationalization and international education, and still be an advocate. And those kinds of programs are a significant part, I think, of internationalization and diplomacy around the world. And so getting into that work, led me to also say, okay, well, now I have grant writing experience. I have all these organizations at home and friends of mine that wanted to start things, and I wanted to help them out. I wanted to get money for causes that I cared about. And so it's then sort of steered a bit more into general grant writing and fundraising and consulting with organizations about what they needed to do to get to a place where they had the capacity to apply for and successfully manage grants. And that's where a bit more of my LLC took off. And so I was happy because I was learning about all these interesting things going on. Again, some international education rather related, but others completely not. But still just seeing so many people doing such great work that deserves funding and deserves advocacy in the form of grant writing and fundraising and development consulting. And so when a friend of mine sent me the FEA job, I hadn't even been paying that much attention. I had applied to a few jobs over COVID, but I was like, no, nothing is normal. Everything's a mess. Like, what are we doing? Things are taking, 3 months to hear back. Like, I got a kid behind me in kindergarten online. I mean, this is just bleh. A friend of mine sent it to me and I was like, I don't know, but I put it out there, and it really is for me this perfect combination of international education advocacy and supporting students, but also bringing in those fundraising aspects of my prior pathways and challenging me to do more of that. I had not done as much on the donor relations side, and that's where I'm also doing a lot more work now. So it's a bit of something I knew and was probably pretty good at, and some new challenges, and really leading us into this sort of, okay, the pandemic has taken place. Now what era of our existence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess I kind of buried the lead there. I should have asked you first, what is the Fund for Education Abroad? Why don't you give us the elevator pitch on what it is, what you do, who you serve, all those great things.
Yes, not to be confused with all the other acronyms that are EAF and all that in our field.
I feel like you should call it the Fund.
The Fund.
The Fund. And then that's it. And then people in our field will be like, the Fund.
It's all capital FUN and then a little tiny D.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, obviously.
So the Fund for Education Abroad, we were established back in about 2010. So we've been around for about a dozen years now. And we support students who are underrepresented and under-resourced in their international education journeys. So primarily, we support students with financial need who identify as people of color, community college students, and first-generation college students. But we also manage lots of different funds and scholarships for students who might need additional resources. For example, we work with the Rainbow SIG at NASA to manage the Rainbow Scholarship. We have scholarships for students going to specific regions of the world or coming from specific areas of the US, studying certain things. So we have lots of different scholarships. We manage over about, I think right now we have about 33 different funds that we help to manage. Including our general fund, which is really for anyone in our sort of priority demographics and populations. Thus far, we've supported about close to 870 students to study abroad since about 2011, when we had our first cohorts going. And we've provided about a little over 2.5 million in scholarships. And that 870 is significant because as long as we can keep momentum going and keep up with our goals for the coming year, it means that within the year, we'll come to that milestone of having supported 1,000 students with scholarships. And I say supporting 1,000 students with scholarships because we also still work with students who apply but don't receive our scholarships. We provide advising, we invite applicants to career panels and other events that we have. We have our trustees often networking with applicants and schools and institutions. So I think that number, while significant, and it's a number that I'm very proud of, sort of focuses it on the scholarship work we do, which again is really important. And I think that is where we're making the biggest difference. But I feel like our organization does a lot in terms of support before, during, and after with lots of students and lots of institutions. And it's something that I'm very proud of.
That's cool. Actually, I realize about the external sort of advising of non-recipients. Do you have a ballpark of how many students that has been who probably have applied, but have actually shown up to an event, at least one, and actually took you up on that advising?
Yes, so I just have kind of an anecdotal story of a student who applied for a scholarship, and then I had been talking with them because they went to a community college and didn't really have, we've revisited a lot of our systems and processes over the last couple of years. I'm probably driving everybody crazy because I came in June 2021 and we're changing tons of things, but I think in our real sort of efforts to move towards more equity and access and inclusion and justice. And so this student, I had been talking with them, they had missed the deadline. They weren't sure what kind of program they were going to go on, but they were looking at our application and thinking like, where do I even go to get some of this information? I'm not on campus a lot, and they really, that one student, I kept saying, okay, well, like you could still, this was an older student. It's like, you could review for us in the future, even if you don't go abroad. You can come to these events that we have. Our events are open access. Anybody can come to them. We recently, for example, did a panel about student athletes going abroad. So the student, I think, had signed up for at least a couple of our advising sessions and things on FEA Day last year, but also had connected us to someone on their campus that does some advising for study abroad. And it's one of those things where it's kind of a part of maybe a non-official part of their job, right? But when I think about that student and just the questions that they triggered for me in terms of how we could revisit some of our processes and procedures to make them more understandable and accessible, now that person on that campus is talking to students about what we do. And we have those people on our mailing lists, and we have, those names of people at those institutions that we can also go to ask, are we doing this right? And I feel like that's just important to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just off the top of your head, what do you think that number might be? Because I think that'll probably really shock people, the number of students who've gone through potentially. And it doesn't have to be exact.
So for example, this, I guess in this current round, we have about 1,200 and something applications, like 1,220 applications that came through. All of those students are now sort of in our pipelines for information and getting event info, and many of them have emailed us and called us over this application cycle. Right. But we'll only award under 100 of them.
Yeah.
And so, our awards, we're philanthropic. We rely on fundraising, which has not been normal in the last few years. So our awards are at a lesser percentage than I obviously would like them to be, but they've been that way for a while. We had some really large application cohorts prior to 2020 as well, where anywhere from about 6 or so to 10% of students were being awarded. But all those people have remained in our pipeline. So
that's great. So, I mean, just ballpark, if those numbers stayed true the whole time, obviously it's like over 10,000 students potentially have been touched or impacted by FEA in some way, whether they were a recipient or received advising and support in some capacity. That's amazing. That's really great work. So I guess one of the things I wanted to chat about was like in terms of FEA and how obviously you focus on specific demographics of students, but what about the types of programs that they go on? Do you have a hierarchy of like, well, if they're going abroad for a full semester or year, they get priority versus a short-term program? How do you balance sort of the type of program in your decision making on how scholarships are awarded?
We don't prioritize certain types of programs necessarily over others. For us, it is more about the length of time is what can determine how much funding a student can access through us. Should they be selected for a scholarship? But this is actually a very timely conversation you're bringing up. We, until pretty recently, had a 28-day minimum requirement. And so we worked with our board, which includes people from community colleges and other organizations, to kind of make the case. I mean, Gilman had removed it, other organizations are removing it. But again, for me, a big question about our practices is whether or not they are inviting students to consider study abroad, right? And to consider if they would even be eligible for funding and opening that up as a possibility for them. And so when we think about, I just gave a presentation about this last week at the National Scholarship Provider Association conference. When we think about our practices, there are exclusive practices, i.e. like you must be enrolled in a bachelor's program at a four-year institution. But then there's like non-inclusive practices, i.e. you are thinking of going on a spring break program. There's your one chance to go. You are an older student, you have children, you have dependents, you work full-time, other kinds of things going on, that a 28-day program just, that's immediately you read that and you're like, this isn't meant for me. And so we want students to come to what we're doing and think this is potentially for me. Mm-hmm. And so we removed that program length requirement, and we are still seeing, students making the case across the board. We have students who apply to go on a year-long program that are basically like, I saw pictures of this country and it's pretty. And then we have students who, a lot of it is the case that the student makes for the reason they're choosing that program in our essays. And we have a rubric that reflects how strongly they do that, while also obviously taking into consideration other aspects of their application. We have students who apply for spring break and summer term and winter term programs, or programs that have, some kind of a component that's in the classroom or online, and then, has an abroad component, that make an incredibly strong case for it. And so that is what we are paying attention to. And I am really proud of the work we're doing, getting to that point of not just opening up our applications, but also changing people's minds in the field that have been, I think, very much like along the, I don't know,
traditionalist. I would call them traditionalists.
Let's say that. And there's nothing wrong with taking into account, I think, that opinion and that perspective, but not everybody can do the be dropped into a country with your knapsack and don't speak the language yet and stay for a year. That's just not a possibility for everybody. And so I'm really proud of the work we're doing to kind of change the way that the way that people access study abroad can be viewed.
Mm-hmm. So do you find the type of program students are going on tends to be more of like internal faculty led or exchange programs versus program provider programs? And does that ever play a role in, how much a student is awarded? Because for instance, if they're going on a semester long exchange program to Barcelona, that's conceivably a much lower ticket, experience versus a provider program to Barcelona for that same semester. It's gonna be much more expensive. What conversation do you all have around that, about like funding the more expensive versus the less expensive programs that, same duration, for instance?
So there's kind of 2 points to this answer. One thing that we want our application to do, because we can't fund most of them, unfortunately, until I get that Mackenzie Scott money coming in one day. But we will we want people to, this is like something I read, I think in Dan Savage, honestly, I can't believe I'm about to quote this. We want people to leave us better than when they came in, i.e. with maybe a fuller understanding of the finances of what they're going to be doing. And so we're actually reworking some of our financial information forms and our application processes so that students are understanding the real costs of study abroad. You know, I know that you know this, Brooke, and so many people probably listening to this podcast know this, but there is that like, oh, this short-term program is $3,000. And then it turns out like the semester program would actually be the more financially like feasible program for a student who's going to be able to transport their federal aid, their state aid, their institutional scholarships and aid, those kinds of things, right? Yeah. So we're reworking some of our application forms and the things that students we want them to take away from this. And some of that is financial understanding of what the program they're choosing will actually mean. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of just one piece of it, because we talk to a lot of students who reach out to us to say like, well, I found this program, it's really inexpensive. And we're like, well, actually, as a Pell recipient, you can take this aid and that aid, and you should talk to this person on your campus about this, because that is what might be more reasonable for you financially. So the other side of that is, again, it really is about the case that the student can make, and then where we find they need funding. So with the shorter term programs, the faculty led makes the most sense for some students. With it being, we basically give a minimum of $1,000 scholarship. That's our goal. We feel like that helps with airfare and maybe some additional costs. Many of our partners, our access partners, they're providers. And so they actually have designated scholarships set aside with us. And for some of those providers, a student might even might get a provider scholarship, an access partner scholarship from us, and the provider may end up meeting that. So from their end, so some of the providers that we're working with that have been our partners for a while in this work are, you know, it makes it more financially feasible for them. And then students who are going on their exchange programs, whether it's semester or a year, we actually do have some program partners, access partners that are institutions abroad that will work with the institution here to kind of waive that tuition for the semester. So there's different ways. It's not all cash scholarships. I wish it could all be. But those are also really valuable, and actually sometimes are above and beyond what our $5,000 scholarship for the semester is.
Yeah.
So
I feel like I feel like just bring this up when you talk about, I mean, we've talked about this issue of like, what's the real cost of study abroad versus what the sticker price is. And I feel like it goes like two ways. I feel like we need to like almost as a field think of how we display pricing. We should think of it like a SaaS company, like a technology company would display pricing. They put like their monthly fee versus the annual fee if you pay up ahead, right? So I feel like we need like three options where it's like the middle is the sticker price, and then like one is like with aid and all the, additional, with aid, this is how much it really costs. And then another one that's like with aid plus all the additional things that's not included in the sticker price. So they can see it's like, oh, this is the real cost of what's happening. I know that would be very hard, we have a lot of programs and products, but I just think getting into a mindset of like, don't just show students the sticker price. Cause that's right. The hard thing with like higher ed in general, that has its own beast. And I could go on and on about the racket of higher education pricing. But at the same time, like when you look at it, it's sort of like, yeah, it might cost X per semester for 15 credits, but that's not really what most students are paying. Right. And so, but if you're a first generation college student, like we both were, you don't know that. You just look at the sticker price and you say, okay, I'm going to make this sacrifice and I'm just going to take out loans, which is what I did. Or maybe another student might be like, well, I have to go to the local state university because that's the lowest sticker price, right. And not knowing that like, oh, if they went somewhere else, it might actually be similar or the same or less. With calculating their aid. So it gets very complicated. And I know I've talked to a lot of parents who maybe they don't really understand how higher, like my niece and nephews, for instance. My brother also didn't go to college. So when I'm advising them, it's like eyes kind of glaze over. I'm like, it sounds really complicated. And if you've never done before, it is super complicated. So I think, when you talk about your advising and like giving students tools up front for them to like plug in the numbers, I think a lot more organizations are doing that now to sort of say, okay, what is the real bottom line that you need to be thinking about? And then what is I feel like our next thing, as I think in the study abroad world, we need to be responsible for too, is also educating students on the long-term implication of whatever that bottom line turns out to be. So let's say, after all the aid, they get a scholarship, they get to take their Pell Grant, but they still have whatever, $12,000, I don't know, whatever. It's like that isn't covered. That's going to have to come from somewhere. And likely it's going to be some kind of loan. And so then giving them the education on, okay, if this is a federal loan, whatever, like this is how much you're going to pay over time and da da da. I will say, and I know we're getting off the rails here because I have another question like coming up, but I just feel like as I'm a huge advocate for this, as you talked about like the perfect storm of a job coming to you and just like, oh my God, this is perfect for me. That's how I felt when I took the job at Johnson County Community College. Because it was like the perfect storm of all the things I'm very passionate about. And but I think with the loan education in higher education, I hope it's getting better. I hope financial aid offices are doing this better. But I know I went to 2 undergrad institutions and they were both, I don't think the individual humans were predatory, but the process was very predatory. And anyway, this is not the story of Brooke's like federal loan, like fallout and it's private loan issues, but it is a thing. It's a real thing. And I'm only 22, but really I'm 41, y'all. And this is still something I'm grappling with now because I made a really uninformed decision when I was 19. And that's, anyway, so I'm going to let you say something now.
No, I think, but it's so important, Brooke, because we literally yesterday, my team and I got together to talk about our financial aid form because we just, obviously we want to give scholarships to everybody who applies to us, right? They applied to us for some reason, but we tend to, the way that we have sort of analyzed the financial information from students in the past has really reflected the EFC from FAFSA and if they're Pell eligible and other types of aid they're getting. And what we haven't done quite as much, and I think this is us, and I think this is a field issue, is looking at the students who are a little bit more in the financial middle, maybe. And the middle, in a lot of ways, we could talk about that on a whole other podcast. Thanks for having me back in advance. But I think that we're not thinking about those students, and this is not to say that students who are very high need in terms of having a Pell and having a very low EFC or no EFC don't deserve the funding either. But I do think, particularly when we're looking at it through our limited funding lens as a philanthropic organization, we are actually going to factor in loan amounts that students are taking out to meet the unmet need, to meet generally what they need to meet to even go to college right now, but what they may additionally need to take out to do study abroad. And that's actually going to be a factor moving forward in the decisions that we're making around who to award and how to award. Because I do feel, when there's the Gilman for students who receive Pell, and quite a few providers and institutions will meet students who have very high financial need. But then there are students who have need that are also taking loans to meet that need, sometimes very not generous loans in terms of how they're going to pay them back. And so I think that is an important piece and something we all as a field kind of need to reflect on how we're going to work with students through that. This should not be, while I want students to leave in a better place, I part of that is making sure they don't leave with more debt than they've already. It is an investment in themselves, but we don't want them to leave with more debt to have an experience that other students have no problem having because they had the access and a parent who walked them through it and all of that. That is a key goal for me.
Yeah, I love that. That's great to hear. And I'll have to have you back so we can talk about how, you know, that's played out in the next year and made any changes to the students that you're serving or how you're serving them. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and then we can come back to some other like lighter topics after this. But I think that's like a great segue into sort of that larger elephant in the room conversation, kind of like with the student loan debt forgiveness controversy going on right now. We're going to talk about that. But one of the arguments there is that, well, you love it or hate the student loan forgiveness portion of it, it doesn't technically address the root cause, sort of like the root cause of like higher education just being like astronomically expensive. So that sort of like trickles down, if you will, to the education abroad experience where, yeah, you could get $50 million tomorrow, but to fund all these scholarships, but it doesn't really address the root cause of the necessity for scholarships or loans to make these programs happen. And it's the pricing that's happening at the provider or the university level that is dictating the need for money. And so I'm curious how you as an organization, or if you have a philosophy on how you're approaching or having conversations with providers or institutions. We just sort of accept it in a lot of ways. We're like, oh, that's how much it costs. And it's like, well, does it really? And as somebody who's been in the back offices of a lot of those meetings of how the sausage is made, sometimes it's not just this exact cost and just a little bit more to pay our overhead and our staff. It can get a little bloated, and I don't want to get too controversial here. So I'm just curious your thoughts or conversations you're having as an organization around that kind of root cause of the net need for your organization.
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that we're lucky that we have our access partners, and we have this access advisory board that meets relatively regularly to talk about bigger issues we're all seeing with students who have financial need, but also, again, like there's so many students we can't fund, how to make this a positive experience for all of them. And really for anybody that we end up touching, coming into contact with through just existing, right? Students reaching out to us, advisors reaching out to us. There's sometimes just this, I wouldn't say avoidance, but, we tend to, when we think of education and higher education in this country, a lot of people do go right to those like four-year institutions. They go right to the big research institutions, the universities of blah, 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 blah. And there's so many other types of education, higher education taking place across the country, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with just knowing who's in higher education right now. The realities of, I want to say, I just presented with somebody from a community college last week, and she mentioned that like 40% of students enrolled in higher education right now are at community colleges.
Yep.
Thinking about the different types of institution is sort of step one, right? Like the different types of institutions and the students attending those institutions and why they're attending those institutions. That's step one, I think, from the provider side and from everybody's side. I mean, I know Podium is doing this, right? Thinking about like who's going to school, where they're going to school, why they're going to school, what are they trying to do, what's their end goal, and how can we get them some kind of an experiential learning opportunity in that time that they're in that education phase of their higher education phase. This is, I feel like, fundamental to really us understanding like a baseline that needs to change significantly in terms of access and funding. And I can speak the same to you as you spoke, Brooke, about bloat, and I do think that there's been, since entering the field about 20 years ago and seeing what used to be the case and what places used to spend on their swag and on their site visits and all of that, that there really has been sort of this movement towards doing things more effectively so that it kind of filters down to the students and what they're paying to go on these programs, and keeping them, I don't want to say honest, but keeping them really like authentic. But I think there's still a lot of work to do. And again, a big part of that is maybe not relying only on, those students at the big four-year institutions who have the office that can audit the different agreements you have and figure out where the need is, and thinking about how providers and how different exchange programs and organizations out there can make their programs accessible to the student at a school that doesn't have a study abroad advisor and doesn't have a person in the financial aid office that they can just go and see and talk to, and doesn't have someone at home encouraging them to go abroad, right? I think that some of that has been taken for granted. You see the same types of institutions with all the big providers partnering with them. Where's my people at my community college consortiums? Where's my people at my tribal colleges? Where's my HBCU folks? Learning who's going to school there, understanding the infrastructures at those institutions, and figuring out how you can equitably grant access to your programs from the UMNs, the UMDs, all of those institutions, the NYUs, the Gouchers, the same kind of access and equity and information getting to the student who is, a commuter student who's taking 6 credits at a community college in Nebraska or wherever. That, just looking at it from that perspective, will, I think, potentially change the conversation. And I think that is where we can, as a very small organization that's stretched thin, that is one thing we can do, is remind people these are where our applicants are coming from. This is the stories they're telling. And this is why we as a field have to start taking these into account when we're thinking about expanding access.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really great approach to this particular question. I think
it's an approach. It's not a solution.
Right, exactly. That's it's one avenue of many that will need to be taken. I think, my experience, and obviously this is anecdotal, but in my time at Johnson County Community College, I entered that role after having been in the field for a very long time. And so I knew a lot of people and the players and had lots of the experiences. And when I talked to, my friends who I love, and they work at great organizations, and I know they're like in this because they believe in what we do. At the same time, they are not interested in working with me at a community college because they just know my students are never going to be able to pay the price tag that they've decided to attach to that program. And whether or not that's the actual price or not, that's the actual cost of doing business, they're still private companies. And even if they're nonprofits, their goal is to bring in more profits year over year. So I think that is where there is a bit of maybe a values disconnect in some way, because at the end of the day, it's not truly just about like, okay, how can we serve more students? And give them this experience that we all tell them is like so vital for their future and them, becoming these great global citizens and getting a great job and making more money. We tell them all these things. And then we say, oh, and then take out a great amount of debt to potentially make that happen. Yeah, I just don't see them going, okay, yeah, we'll just like charge half price for community college students. Like that's just never going to happen. When you look at like the price of a program, there's program providers out there who charge like $25,000 for a semester. And I'm not even talking about like semester C, which everyone blames for being expensive, but I'm like, actually, you can go to a lot of other provider programs in Ireland and pay $25,000. But there are some that are much more affordable than that for sure. And I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush. And, the higher ed institutions are also like, they also have a bottom line. I just think when we start peeling back the layers of this and actually really dissecting how this, I know that's so gross to say, but how the sausage is made, it's not like a kumbaya land of just like, let's send more students abroad, yay, and let's raise more money for it, yay. There was an article, was it US News? I think that was just how colleges are expanding access to study abroad. I like that study abroad is getting broader media coverage, but at the same time, it was that same old stuff, raising more money and educating students on the opportunity. And it's like, I think we were talking about that when I started in the field in 2003. So like nothing has changed. Nothing has really changed how we really approach this. I mean, you brought up Podium. So now I get to, I wasn't even going to bring it up, but obviously Podium Education, where I work now, is another kind of company that's like near and dear to my heart because I really believe in the program model and approach, which kind of segues into one of my questions I wanted to ask now is, with the pandemic and I think majority of people, I don't know, maybe not majority, but a lot of people in our field now embracing what the digital experience can do for students' intercultural development and these new avenues to exploring how do we get to the end goal? Like, how do we get to the outcomes we say study abroad gets without
Mhm.
having the mobility factor in play? And that's exactly what Podium does with our global tech experience. Okay, what's that result we're going for? Now let's
Mhm.
create a different avenue to get them there that is much more affordable and much more accessible to students like who can't go and be away from home and all the things. But what's your philosophy, or what's FEA's philosophy on even exploring funding opportunities for students who want to participate in a digital experience that probably also has a program fee, like an internship or like
Mhm.
the global tech experience? I mean, the program fee is like pennies on the dollar compared to like a study
Right.
abroad, but it's still an access issue. I mean, if you're low income like we were, like any amount of extra money is extra money. It doesn't matter. So I don't know if you guys have had conversations about expanding the types of programs in terms of that digital experience.
Yeah, we've definitely had conversations, and I have, it's impossible to have been in the field this long and not know people who are getting into that space. So I've had some great conversations with colleagues and friends of mine who are either entering the sort of virtual experiential learning organizations or considering it for their students at their institutions. And we've thought about it and where FEA would be a part of that. And I think kind of getting back to the prior point in our conversation, it's actually, while it's our goal to fund more students, it's our goal eventually not to have to exist. Like, we want this to be like everybody can do what they want to do. They have access to different types of programs. They know what's out there. They can be fully and thoroughly advised on the different opportunities. And I think very much that these virtual opportunities have a significant role to play. I actually worked a lot with virtual exchanges and virtual programs that had virtual components when I was at Cultural Vistas. I rarely say some places are really ahead of the curve, but like the International Visitor Learning IVLP, so the International Visitor Leadership Program, sorry, and other programs with DOS have been incorporating virtual for a long time. And I think that it definitely has a place in full holistic internationalization at institutions. Our goal right now, because we have such limited funding for FEA and we can't even award the students who are applying to us all at the levels we want to, is it is meant to really offset the costs of study abroad, not pay for the whole thing. I wish, again, we were at a place like that, but I think as we continue to grow, and as students, again, can make very convincing arguments, I think, as to why this is a well-suited opportunity for them to engage in international education and exchange. We saw a lot of students over COVID that received our scholarships making a strong case for virtual experiences, and they were given their scholarships. And so I think it will depend on where we are in terms of funding and where we are in terms of the field generally thinking about ways that we can all work together for this holistic international education goal, and to provide access. Those questions and conversations will eventually, be what leads us into where we're thinking about things in the next couple of years.
I didn't really prep you for this question, but and we can cut this out later if you don't want to talk about it. But I think that's like is a great opportunity for maybe you to explain or educate us on like how the sort of scholarship management donor kind of thing works. I mean, I think on principle we get it. It's like people donate money, you distribute it out, like yes. But at the end of the day, like I know there's more going on in the back end where maybe if more of us understood the trials, tribulations, challenges of an organization like yours, and like what would be like silver bullets for you as an organization that either help you fulfill your mission faster or just have less stress or what have you, aside from like being awarded $100 million tomorrow, like something like a major donor in that way. Can you maybe explain a little bit about like that ecosystem just briefly?
Sure.
Maybe it'll help people understand like why it's so important to either, like I could donate $500, which I'm sure everyone would appreciate, but why maybe that isn't as powerful as me putting in my will or something like an endowed scholarship or something that like pays back over time. I don't know. You explained it all to us.
Well, look at you thinking about our planned giving for us. Thanks.
We'll see. We'll see. Well, hopefully I don't die anytime soon, but yes. So
Um,
morbid to think about your wills, but as you get to a certain age, everybody, it becomes a thing that you have to think about.
It is something we talk about. I think it's helpful to have a little bit of a frame of reference of where we were. We were growing from about 2010 to 2015, 16. And we were gaining momentum, but there was a need for sure to kind of put something bigger out there and to launch a campaign. So in 2017, we did two big things. We launched a 5-year campaign, 2017 to 2022, and then this like fun little thing happened right in the middle of that. And then we also launched our Access Partner Program. So what I think had been notable about the first years of our existence, where of course we did have some big time supporters and bigger donors, but the majority of people who wanted to support what we were doing were the people who knew why it was so important, and those were people from the field of international ed. And as you and I know, even as 22-year-old TikTok stars, we know that we're never going to be gazillionaires in this field, right? This is not a field that people are getting big salaries. This is not a field right now. This isn't even a field where people are necessarily staying in jobs like really long term. Some, but not that many. I feel like a lot of people I'm seeing are shifting away or shifting to other things. Even I, for example, shifted from study abroad to J1 work and other kinds of work. So I think that we still have a lot of people who really support that work and maybe at some point worked in study abroad or international education, but they're not our, $2 million people, right? Like they want to support us over the long haul. And that is something that I have sort of put an emphasis on as I've come into the organization. Is as a philanthropic organization, I want people to feel like they can be involved in this work, even if they can't give $500, but they could give $10 a month, $5 a month. They can blast out our LinkedIn messages about our events. They can review for us. They can do other things. Philanthropy is something I feel really strongly that is a way for people to do advocacy for something they care a lot about. And it shouldn't be viewed only as something you can do if you have gobs of money to give away. So we have kind of taken a step back. We were in the middle of that campaign and it was going really well. And we were getting access partners that were providers in international education and exchange to basically trust us with stewarding their funds towards students who they wanted to have on their programs, but maybe weren't sure they'd be able to recruit on their own. We are right now in a place where we're showing people that they can be involved in our work regardless of whatever the entry point would be for that, right? And I think that's really important, particularly for people in our field who maybe were on furlough or got laid off or changed jobs quite a bit. It's also a way for people who have changed positions in the field or changed fields totally to remember why this was important, as either something they did in higher education in their own experiences, or as something that helped them, create their career pathway wherever they've ended up if they worked in international education. The realities of it are, we're coming out of the pandemic with lots of emergent causes we're competing with. The elections coming up there, a lot of our endowment did not perform so well as most people's invested funds didn't over the past couple of months. Nobody's looking at their retirement plans right now, or they're looking and crying. And so we're grappling with that reality. We had just gotten to a place where some of our endowed funds were about to do so well and about to provide lots of scholarships, and that's going to change. So we are managing, and I think just surviving right now through some wonderful donors, but at very different levels, through some wonderful reviewers and volunteers, through people who are advocating and not forgetting about us, for people who are saying, I can't do something right now, but I want to come back, or I want to make you part of my planned and estate giving. And those are all just so important. I think it's also been nice for me as I've been able to engage and network with people that, I hadn't seen in a couple of years when I left study abroad, and coming back and realizing that we really are all in this for sort of the right reasons and with the right intentions. And kind of getting some of them re-engaged in the work that FEA is doing has been really wonderful for me.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about how it's been impacted, but I guess the upside is that it will rebound at some point. So hopefully it'll turn around. But yeah, that's not ideal. My next question was going to ask, how can people get involved? How can they support FEA? And so, like, what do you have going on coming up? I know we wanted to get this interview and now to talk about the gala that you guys have coming up in December. So you can tell us a little bit about that. And, if there is somebody out there listening who's like, I've got a cool $1 million that I'd love to give away. Like, how do they contact you? Like, let's make that happen. Let's manifest that into our universe here.
Sure. Well, thank you for this opportunity to talk about what we have going on at FEA. So we do have a gala coming up in DC. We're really excited. This is our first in-person gala since 2019. And so this is where we will basically be fundraising for our scholarship funds for the next year or so. We have a goal. This is basically our way also to close out the campaign and figure out what the next few years look like. So we have a goal for the event. We'll have a live and a silent auction as part of the event, but it's also just going to be a fun way to reconnect with people that you haven't seen in a while. And it's in Washington, D.C. on December 1st. Information's on our website and on all of our social media platforms. You can purchase a ticket, you could purchase a sponsorship, you could purchase or donate an auction item. All of those are ways that people are currently supporting that. And it'll be a big event. It'll be over 250 people. So we're just really excited to have everybody kind of back together in the spirit of supporting FEA. Some of our scholars will be there. So it's also a great way to connect and hear some of their stories as well. Mm-hmm. We also have leaning into us as an organization that I do think sort of owes the world some services and some information about why our work is important. We'll have FEA Day coming up in December. And again, there will be some sponsorship opportunities for that. But that's really our way to connect with advisors about our scholarship, to connect with students and work with them to kind of more fully explain our application processes and how we decide awards, and generally just answer questions about what is FEA, what is this random acronym, what are y'all doing? There's, what do the dollar signs mean? And again, kind of making sure we're relaying information about why this work is important, but also practical information that's helping people who are either working with students or the students themselves. And then in the spring, we'll be at different conferences. We've started doing smaller events at the conferences we're attending now that we're sort of back in person. And sometimes those support specific scholarships. Sometimes those are supporting our general scholarships and operational costs, but they've been wonderful ways to also just get people together that are supporters of FEA and potential supporters of FEA. And so we always post those events as they're coming up on our website and on our social media platforms. So you could follow us on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of the things. We don't have a TikTok yet. Maybe we should work on that. But
you're too busy working on your own TikTok stardom. So yeah.
I'll probably get my 6-year-old to do it for me. I'm better at it.
So tell us the date of the gala if people are interested, because it's going to go live in about a week. So early November, I believe. So if you're listening to this live, like when it's close to coming out, you still have time to get a ticket and get some good flights, go to DC, make a whole weekend of it. What are the dates for that?
It's going to be Thursday, December 1st.
Okay, make it a week of it. Yeah, December 1st. Okay, great. So everybody get that on your calendar. Also, FEA Day, just go to thefunforeducationabroad.org. They'll have all the details listed there. And of course, you can connect with Angie on LinkedIn and go say hello. Tell her that the Spotlight sent you. Angie, thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting with us about all things study abroad, the fun for education abroad, but also just sort of this larger question of funding and access and helping more students have these experiences, both from the funding side, but also from the cost side. So it's a really interesting conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you again, Angie, for coming on the Gateway Spotlight. Before you guys head out, we have a quick message from our founder and managing director, Tony Ogden.
It's my pleasure to have FEA, Angela Schaefer, on the program today to tell all of us about the amazing work that FEA does to support international learning and engagement of all students, particularly those that may not otherwise be able to participate in programming such as education abroad. As such, Gateway has made a commitment of 5% of all gross revenue to support international learning and engagement. And in large part, that goes straight over to the FEA to support the Gateway International Group Scholarship, as well as the great work that FEA does. So please join me, folks, in supporting FEA. Please share your commitment to expanding international learning and engagement to impact students all around this country to be able to engage in really meaningful and important international learning and engagement. So we'd like to thank FEA, and of course, thank you to Brooke Roberts and all of the team of folks that made today's episode possible. Take care, everybody.